Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. If you watched one of my recent videos on the Pre-Pottery Neolithic site of Karahan Tepe, a large ancient settlement dating back 11,000 years ago, you may remember these cut marks. Dozens of small circular pits that were dug into the limestone bedrock, all in close proximity and with no obvious explanation. These pits are often found concentrated or grouped together in a circular or oval shape. They are found right across the Tas Tepeler region, with famous examples at Gobekli Tepe, but what are they? They're a feature of these ancient sites that have gotten a lot of attention but little interpretation. But a 2016 paper by Bahatan Selik does offer an intriguing explanation, that they were in fact the first phase in building a basin for water. As you may know if you've been following my series on Tas Tepeler, many pre-pottery Neolithic sites in southeastern Anatolia were situated on mountaintops and tall hills. And so far, as we can see, many sites with an elevation above 600 metres had no natural source of water. If people were advanced enough to create sites like Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe 11 to 12,000 years ago, they must have been clever enough not to expend so much energy walking downhill hundreds of metres and then back up carrying water from a lake or river. Something they would have had to have repeated over and over again. They must have had ways of catching and containing water at the higher elevations. 10 to 12,000 years ago, southeastern Anatolia received regular rainfall in the autumn, winter and spring. Rainfall was most frequent in springtime, and climate data certainly says that ancient Anatolia was not a dry, lifeless wasteland as some might believe. Well, maybe it was during the summer, but for the rest of the year it was wet. High in the hills, precipitation was the main source of water, and so this water needed to be caught and kept. And the ancient people did this by making basins in the bedrock, and these are always in strategic and well-planned locations. All the basins in the pre-pottery Neolithic sites are built on or in close proximity to the slopes of the settlement. They are also often found close to cult buildings, and they sometimes contain a ledge or seating area inside, as seen at Karahan Tepe and also at Seberch. Some of them also have a staircase going into them, as noted by the late Klaus Schmidt at Gobekli Tepe and also by Nesmi Carroll at Karahan Tepe. And sometimes we see artificial channeling to direct runoff water into man-made basins. These basins range in size from 1.5 to 3 metres in diameter, and their depth ranges from 70 centimetres to 1.5 metres. The basins at Karahan Tepe are larger, but these likely had a special function. Numerous small basins in the bedrock are a much better concept than one large basin because limestone by its nature can be found to be fractured, and hence a larger basin means it's more likely you will encounter a crack or bedrock imperfection as the excavated area grows in size. As noted by archaeologists, the bedrock selected to carve the basins are smooth and crack-free. There are actually no examples of finished basins that do contain a natural fracture, and amazingly, when it rains they still retain water today, 11,000 years later. This shows the ancient people did survey the bedrock carefully. The basins are generally round or oval in shape, but there is a more rectangular example on the northern slope of the hill at Gobekli Tepe. Channels and gutters were built beside it, allowing more water to flow into it. Through detailed analysis, experts now believe they understand how they were made. The innovative method used the basic stone tools of the day: flint, obsidian and pebbles. The workers would carve out small burrows with a diameter of 10 to 15 centimetres and also 10 to 15 centimetres in depth. These burrows were made at intervals within a designated zone. These are the cut marks we find today, meaning many examples we see in the field may well be unfinished basins. When the burrows were all dug, the edges between them were hammered and broken off. Therefore, the small burrows merged together, forming a large depression in the bedrock. The workers would then start the process all over again, but this time on the base of the shallow basin. This would make it even deeper, and the process could have been repeated between 10 and 15 times. Remember, they were working limestone and not granite or basalt, so although it was still hard work, the stone tools were harder than the bedrock, and so it wouldn't have taken as long as we may think. Experts have analysed basins at Gobekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Ayan Lahoyuk, Hamzan Tepe and more, and they have come to this conclusion regarding their construction. At the shallow basin of Karahan Tepe, we can see there are many cut marks on the floor of the basin, and these are next to the deep hole. This means it is likely the entire basin was going to be deeper, but it looks like the work was halted for reasons unknown. Maybe they found a potential problem with the bedrock, or there was some change of direction in water runoff, or maybe the people simply changed the plan of the settlement. We can see that part of this basin was artificially dammed, and this channel was also created to direct water into the second pool, bypassing the first, so it does look like there was a fundamental change of plan. We should also note that on completion, the basins would have had to have been covered in some way. Maybe a roof was constructed, or maybe they were just covered with tree branches and leaves. Either way, something had to be added to prevent evaporation. Basin coving, as the process is called, was a successful method for storing water, and this was clearly a developed and tested method long before the major sites like Karahan Tepe and Gobekli Tepe were even planned, because these sites could not have functioned without water. The basins meant that the early Neolithic societies had the freedom to create settlements and ritual sites wherever they desired, and they didn't have to be on a riverside or lakeside. The technique of making basins, together with the post-Ice Age climate, meant that people could live in the mountains and hills, accumulate water and reserve it for the summer. Although water was less abundant, and although there was no easy access to fish, highland sites would have offered people other benefits, such as fewer pests and predators. So, from careful analysis, it seems the first phase of making a water basin at a pre-pottery Neolithic site was by carving a number of cut marks, merging them into one, and then continuing the process downwards. This doesn't mean that every cut mark we see was related to water. Some circular holes in the bedrock could have been for the placement of wood, therefore having a structural purpose. Some of them may have also been for planting a specific crop. I imagine that some of the cut marks were also prospective, simply dug to check whether or not the bedrock was suitable for a basin. Maybe in the process of making cut marks, workers did come across defects in the bedrock, and that's why we find these bizarre accumulations today. They could well be unfinished simply because there was no need to finish them, because the ground was unusable. Maybe that is why we often find finished basins close to an accumulation of cut marks, because the workers were selecting the best location with the least chance of defective bedrock and hence no chance of leakage. This may well be the case at Karahan Tepe, because the entire bedrock outcrop that's next to the main enclosure is covered with cut marks, no doubt testing the rock to help select the best place to build the largest important basins, as well as the smaller basins we also see at Karahan Tepe. I would recommend watching back my video with the drone footage from Karahan Tepe because it shows the bedrock cut marks very well. I've linked this below in the description. Those with a good knowledge of Gobekli Tepe may well ask, why then do some of the T-shaped pillars also have cut marks on the top? Well, it is a good question, and there is no clear and obvious answer. It is thought by some that these cut marks on the pillars were actually done at a much later date, after the circular enclosures were buried and decommissioned. It's believed the enclosures were covered with soil, rubble and boulders right up to the tops of the pillars, meaning the top of each pillar was at the level of the new ground surface. The same people that covered the enclosures may well have added the cut marks to the pillars to mark their positions, so they could easily be found in the future. Such an idea isn't actually as strange as it sounds. After analysing the pillared basin at Karahan Tepe, archaeologists noted that filling the enclosure was a careful process. As it was filled, large stones were placed on top of the bedrock pillars so they could be located easily at the surface, and also to stop possible damage if the site was re-excavated in the future. When the fill was close to completion, large flat slabs of rock were placed on top, precisely outlining the enclosure, so again it could be located in the future. At Gobekli Tepe, if ancient people were going to recommission a site to uncover a filled enclosure, they would have found a mass of limestone rocks, boulders and rubble, but the rocks that contained cut marks would stand out and people would know they'd come across the pillars of the enclosure. Alternatively, maybe the people that made the cut marks on the pillars had maybe seen the older cut marks on the hillside and believed it was some kind of art or ritualistic act by their ancestors, and so they did the same thing on the tops of pillars. I actually think the answer is far more straightforward, and I think many of the strange anomalies we see at these sites do become clearer when we accept that each enclosure once had a roof. To be honest, and also scientific, it's the only way to explain the lack of erosion on the decorated T-shaped pillars that are made of limestone. I simply can't see how they could have been exposed to the elements for centuries. Why isn't the art more weathered? I firmly believe that each circular enclosure of Gobekli Tepe had a roof, and it looks like this idea is also shared by Turkish authorities, because in their major presentation on Tas Tepeler that was given to the world's media last year, they portrayed the enclosures like this, with the T-pillars supporting a roof. And that's really how I see it. The T-shaped pillars, in my opinion, are roof supports. Decorated, yes, but functional first and foremost. And so the marks on the top surface are related to how the roof was constructed. A rough surface was clearly necessary. I'm still collating information and ideas regarding the specifics of my roof hypothesis, and I'll present this in more detail in the future. Cut marks, however similar in appearance, all likely had different purposes depending on their placement, whether on bedrock, isolated or grouped together. I believe the majority of these cut marks were functional, and not ritual as some say. To end this video, we do know that water basins were made by first making cut marks and then breaking the boundaries between them, a process that continued until the desired depth was reached, an important process that allowed the pre-pottery Neolithic people to flourish on hilltop sites far away from lakes, rivers and predators. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.